The harsh Arizona sun beat down on Maggie Taylor's thin frame as she stumbled alongside her broken wagon, her throat parched and raw from the dust of the trail. 3 days without water had left her desperate, her once vibrant copper hair now dull and matted against her sweat-soaked neck. Her 6-month-old daughter Tessa lay wrapped in a thin blanket beside the wagon wheel, the poor child's whimpers growing fainter with each passing hour. Maggie's husband James had died of fever 2 weeks prior, leaving her to navigate the perilous journey to truth or consequences alone, with nothing but fading hope and a wedding band that now hung loose on her finger. The year was 1885, and the promise of a new life in New Mexico territory had turned into a nightmare for Theodora Maggie Parker. She was 22 years old, widowed, with a baby daughter who might not survive another day in this merciless desert. The wagon axle had snapped clean in two just before dawn, the final blow in a series of misfortunes that had plagued her journey west. Maggie collapsed to her knees beside her daughter, using her body to shield the infant from the relentless sun. The water barrel had run dry that morning, and the last of the food had been consumed the previous night. With trembling fingers, she stroked Tessa's feverish cheek. "Just a little longer, my love," she whispered, though she had no reason to believe help would come. The trail had been empty for days. In the distance, a cloud of dust rose against the horizon. Maggie squinted, uncertain whether it was a mirage born of desperation or actual salvation approaching. As the minutes passed, the dust cloud took shape a rider on horseback, moving at a steady pace toward her stranded wagon. Maggie gathered what little strength remained and stood, waving her arms frantically above her head. "Help!" she called, her voice cracking from thirst. "Please help us." The rider adjusted course, heading directly for her now. As he drew closer, Maggie could make out a tall man astride a chestnut stallion. His face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but his posture was straight and confident in the saddle. When he reached the wagon, he dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the ground. Maggie noted his weathered denim pants, leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and the revolver holstered at his hip. A cowboy, likely from one of the nearby ranches. "Madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal a face tanned by years under the sun, with piercing blue eyes that assessed her situation quickly. He couldn't have been more than 30. "You're in a bad way out here." "My wagon," Maggie explained, gesturing weakly to the broken axle, "and we've no water left." The cowboy's gaze moved to the bundle lying in the dust beside the wagon. His expression softened when he saw the infant. "Your baby shouldn't be out in this heat," he said, his voice gentler now. He reached for the canteen at his side and offered it to Maggie. "Drink." "Not too fast." Maggie accepted the canteen with trembling hands, taking small sips as instructed before kneeling to moisten Tessa's parched lips. The baby stirred, her tiny tongue seeking the moisture. The cowboy knelt beside them, examining the child with concern. "How long have you been out here?" "Since yesterday morning," Maggie replied. "My husband. He died on the trail 2 weeks ago. Fever took him. I thought I could make it to truth or consequences alone, but—" Her voice broke. The cowboy surveyed the broken wagon and the barren landscape surrounding them. His decision was made in an instant. "This wagon isn't going anywhere today, and your baby needs shelter." He looked directly into Maggie's eyes, determination evident in his gaze. "Madam, my ranch is just over that ridge. Your baby slept in the dust beside the wagon long enough. You'll sleep under my roof tonight." There was no suggestion in his tone, only a statement of fact. In that moment, Maggie knew she had no choice but to trust this stranger if her daughter was to survive. "I'm Ethan Anderson," he said, offering his hand to help her up. "Theodora Parker," she replied, taking his hand. "Though most call me Maggie." "Well, Miss Maggie, let me gather what valuables you need from the wagon. You can ride Samson here, and I'll walk alongside." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Ethan interrupted firmly. "You're holding a baby and you're dead on your feet." Maggie nodded, too exhausted to argue further. She indicated a small trunk containing her few remaining possessions, a photograph of her parents, James's pocket watch, a silver hairbrush that had belonged to her grandmother, and the few clothes that hadn't been sold to finance their journey west. Ethan efficiently secured the trunk to his saddle, then lifted Maggie and Tessa onto the horse with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. The relief of being off her feet made Maggie light-headed, and she clutched the saddle horn to steady herself. "Easy now," Ethan murmured, adjusting her position before taking the reins and leading the horse away from the broken wagon. "It's about an hour's walk to the ranch. Think you can hold on that long?" "Yes," Maggie answered, straightening her spine with determination. "We'll manage." As they made their way toward the ridge, Maggie found herself studying her rescuer from behind. Ethan Anderson walked with the confident stride of a man comfortable in his own skin, his shoulders broad beneath his worn shirt. Though they were strangers, there was something reassuring about his presence. "What brings you out to these parts alone, Miss Maggie?" Ethan asked after they had walked in silence for some time. Maggie shifted Tessa in her arms, the baby having fallen into a more peaceful sleep now that they were moving. "James, my husband, had a letter from his cousin in Truth or Consequences. Said there was work for a carpenter and land to be claimed. We sold everything we owned in Tennessee to make the journey. And now I don't know," Maggie admitted. "I have some savings, but not much. I can sew, cook, work as a laundress if needed. I'll find a way to provide for Tessa." Ethan glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "Truth or Consequences is still 15 miles from here. Not a journey to make without proper transportation, especially with a little one." "I'm aware of that, Mr. Anderson," Maggie replied, a hint of her natural spirit showing through despite her exhaustion. "But I haven't come this far to turn back now." A smile tugged at the corner of Ethan's mouth. "Didn't suggest you should, madam, just noting the facts." They crested the ridge, and Maggie caught her first glimpse of Ethan Anderson's ranch. It wasn't the largest property she'd ever seen, but it was well-maintained, a sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, a barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. A stream ran along the eastern border of the property, explaining how he managed to keep the surrounding pastures green despite the arid climate. "It's not much," Ethan said, misinterpreting her silence for disappointment, "but it's mine." "It's beautiful," Maggie responded honestly. After weeks on the trail, the sight of the solid house with smoke curling from its chimney seemed like a palace. As they approached the ranch, a man emerged from the barn older than Ethan, with silver threading through his dark hair and a pronounced limp. He raised a hand in greeting before his expression shifted to curiosity at the sight of Maggie and the baby. "That's Thomas," Ethan explained. "My foreman and oldest friend. He runs things when I'm away." Thomas met them at the gate, his weathered face creased with concern. "Found yourself some strays, did you, Ethan?" "Broken wagon about an hour back," Ethan replied, helping Maggie dismount. "Miss Parker and her daughter need shelter and food." Thomas nodded, taking the reins from Ethan. "I'll see to the horse. Maria's inside, she'll want to fuss over the little one." Maggie clutched Tessa closer, suddenly uncertain. "Who is Maria?" "My housekeeper," Ethan explained, guiding Maggie toward the house with a gentle hand at her elbow. "And before you worry, she's 65 years old and has more or less raised me since I was knee-high. You're in good hands." The interior of the house was simple but comfortable, polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and windows that allowed the afternoon light to filter through muslin curtains. The scent of something savory wafted from the kitchen, making Maggie's empty stomach clench painfully. A short, plump woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her dark eyes widened at the sight of Maggie and the baby. "Dios mío, what have you brought home now, Ethan?" she exclaimed, hurrying forward to inspect the newcomers. "Ladies in distress, Maria," Ethan replied with a smile that transformed his serious face. "This is Miss Theodora Parker and her daughter." "Maggie, please," she corrected automatically. Maria clucked her tongue, already assessing Maggie's condition with practiced eyes. "You are exhausted, Nina, and the baby is dehydrated. Come to the kitchen. Food first, then bath, then rest." Maggie found herself ushered into a warm kitchen where Maria immediately began ladling broth into a bowl while simultaneously preparing a bottle of diluted cow's milk for Tessa. The efficiency with which the older woman moved was impressive, and Maggie felt a rush of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the bowl with trembling hands. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." Ethan, who had followed them into the kitchen, shook his head. "No need for that talk. Eat your soup. I'll have Thomas fetch your trunk from the horse and take it up to the guest room." Maria was already cradling Tessa, expertly coaxing the infant to accept the bottle. "She is too thin," the housekeeper pronounced, "but strong. Like her mother, I think." Maggie ate slowly, savoring each spoonful of the rich broth. As the warm liquid filled her empty stomach, the reality of her situation began to settle over her. She was entirely at the mercy of strangers, with no immediate plan for how to proceed. The weight of her responsibility to Tessa felt suddenly overwhelming. Ethan seemed to sense her distress. "Rest tonight," he said quietly. "Tomorrow is soon enough to make decisions." After the meal, Maria led Maggie upstairs to a modest but clean bedroom with a connecting washroom. A copper tub had already been filled with steaming water, and fresh towels waited nearby. "I will watch the Nina while you bathe," Maria offered, settling into a rocking chair with Tessa. "Take your time. You need to wash away the trail." Too tired to protest, Maggie gratefully sank into the first real bath she'd had in weeks. As she scrubbed away the layers of dirt and despair, she allowed herself to cry silently for James, for their lost dreams, and for the uncertain future that awaited her and Tessa. By the time she emerged, dressed in a clean nightgown she'd found in her trunk, Tessa was sleeping peacefully in Maria's arms. "I have prepared a cradle," Maria said, nodding toward a small wooden cradle beside the bed. "It was Ethan's when he was a baby. Mr. Anderson has children." Maggie asked, surprised. Maria's expression softened with a hint of sadness. "No, Nina. This was his cradle when he was an infant. His mother died when he was very young, and his father. Well, that is Ethan's story to tell if he wishes." Maggie nodded, understanding that there were boundaries she shouldn't cross. She took her sleeping daughter and gently placed her in the cradle, tucking the blanket around her tiny form. "Rest now," Maria instructed, patting Maggie's shoulder. "Morning will come soon enough." Left alone in the quiet room, Maggie slipped between the crisp sheets of the bed, expecting sleep to claim her immediately. Instead, she found herself staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of the blue-eyed cowboy who had rescued them from certain death in the desert. Ethan Anderson was an enigma, stern yet kind, reserved yet generous. She knew nothing about him beyond his name and occupation, yet he had opened his home to her without hesitation. In the brutal landscape of the Arizona Territory, Such kindness was as unexpected as rain in drought. With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Maggie finally drifted into the deepest sleep she'd known since leaving Tennessee. Morning came with the gentle sound of birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, Maggie was disoriented, the comfortable bed and clean room at odds with her recent memories of sleeping rough beside the wagon. Then, Tessa's soft coos from the cradle brought reality rushing back. Maggie rose quickly, finding a simple blue dress laid out on the chair, one of her own from the trunk, freshly pressed. She dressed and attended to Tessa, marveling at how much better her daughter looked after just one night of proper care. The baby's cheeks had a hint of color and her eyes were bright and curious. "We're going to be all right," Maggie whispered, pressing a kiss to Tessa's forehead. "Somehow we'll find our way." Downstairs, she found Maria bustling about the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The housekeeper greeted her with a warm smile. "Ah, you look much better today, Nina. Sit, eat. The men have been up for hours." "Hours?" Maggie glanced at the window, noting the sun was barely over the horizon. Maria laughed. "Ranch life begins before dawn. Ethan and the boys are checking the south pasture. They will return for breakfast soon." True to Maria's prediction, Boots could be heard on the porch just as she was setting plates of eggs, biscuits, and bacon on the table. Ethan entered first, followed by Thomas and two younger men Maggie hadn't met. "Miss Parker," Ethan greeted her with a nod, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "You're looking better this morning." "Thanks to your hospitality," Maggie replied, suddenly self-conscious of her simple appearance compared to the previous day's dishevelment. "Mr. Anderson, I want to properly thank you for what you did yesterday. You saved our lives." Ethan seemed uncomfortable with her gratitude. Any decent man would have done the same. He gestured to the two strangers. "These are my ranch hands, Luke Miller and Daniel Cooper. Boys, this is Miss Theodora Parker and her daughter Tessa." The young men nodded respectfully, though Maggie caught the curious glances they exchanged. She couldn't blame them for wondering about her presence. Single women with infants were not common sights in remote ranches. Breakfast was a surprisingly comfortable affair. The men discussed the day's work: fences that needed mending, a mare about to foal, cattle that needed to be moved to fresh pasture. Maggie listened, finding the routine of ranch life soothing after the chaos of the trail. After the meal, Ethan asked her to join him on the porch. Tessa was contentedly playing in Maria's capable hands, allowing Maggie a rare moment of adult conversation. "I sent Luke into town this morning," Ethan explained, leaning against the porch railing. "He'll bring back supplies and inquire about the stagecoach to Truth or Consequences." Maggie's heart sank. Of course he expected her to move on quickly. Why wouldn't he? She was a burden, a responsibility he hadn't asked for. "That's very kind of you," she managed, keeping her voice steady. "How soon do you think we might be able to leave?" Ethan studied her face, his expression unreadable. "There's no rush, Miss Parker. The stagecoach only runs twice a week, and you need time to regain your strength." He paused. "Besides, I'd like to see if your wagon can be salvaged. No sense in abandoning it if the damage can be repaired." Relief flooded through Maggie. A few more days of safety for her and Tessa was more than she had dared hope for. "Mr. Anderson, Ethan, please," he interrupted. "Mr. Anderson was my father." "Ethan," she amended, finding the familiarity strange on her tongue. "I don't want to impose on your generosity, but I also don't want to be a burden. If there's work I can do while I'm here cooking, cleaning, mending, I'd like to earn my keep." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Maria would have my hide if I let a guest work, especially one who's still recovering." He considered for a moment. "But if you're determined, I won't stop you, just don't overdo it." Maggie nodded, satisfied with the compromise. May I ask you something? You may ask. I might not answer. Why did you stop for us yesterday? You could have ridden past. Many would have. Ethan's gaze drifted to the distant mountains, his expression growing distant. My mother died when I was 4. Fever like your husband. My father tried to get her to a doctor, but the wagon broke down. No one stopped to help. He shrugged, as if the memory no longer pained him. I couldn't ride past a woman and child in need, not in this country. The simple honesty of his answer touched Maggie deeply. I'm sorry about your mother. It was a long time ago. Ethan straightened, closing the subject. I need to check on that mare. Feel free to rest or explore the ranch, just stay close to the house. Desert can be dangerous even in daylight. With that, he strode off toward the barn, leaving Maggie to contemplate the complex man who had saved her life. Over the next few days, Maggie gradually regained her strength. Despite Maria's protests, she insisted on helping with household chores, washing dishes, folding laundry, and even assisting with meal preparation. The routine gave her purpose, something she'd sorely lacked since James's death. Ethan and Thomas had ridden out to her wagon and determined that the axle could be repaired. They'd brought back the rest of her possessions, including James's carpentry tools and the small chest containing their savings. Having these tangible connections to her past life brought Maggie both comfort and pain. On the 4th evening, as Maggie sat on the porch mending one of Ethan's shirts, he joined her, settling into the chair beside her with a tired sigh. Long day? She asked, noting the lines of fatigue around his eyes. Had to chase down some strays that broke through the fence, he replied. One of them decided a rattlesnake made a good playmate. Maggie's hands stilled. Was anyone hurt? Just the snake, Ethan said with a wry smile. But it was a near thing. He gestured to the shirt in her lap. You don't have to do that, you know. I know, I want to. She resumed her neat stitching. It helps me feel useful. They sat in companionable silence as twilight painted the desert in shades of purple and gold. Tessa was already asleep inside, and the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse after dinner. It was a peaceful moment, the kind Maggie hadn't experienced since before James fell ill. Luke brought news from town, Ethan said finally. The stagecoach runs to Truth or Consequences on Tuesday. That's 3 days from now. Oh, Maggie's stomach tightened. I see. He also asked around about work for a widow with carpentry skills in the family. Ethan watched her carefully. Truth or Consequences is growing, but it's still a rough place. The saloon is hiring girls, and there's a laundry that needs help, but it's no place for a woman alone with a baby, Maggie finished for him. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her future seem suddenly bleak. There's another option, Ethan said, his voice carefully neutral. The wagon will be ready tomorrow or the next day. Your original plan was to claim land near Truth or Consequences, wasn't it? Maggie nodded. James's cousin wrote that there was good land available under the Homestead Act. But that was for James to work. I can't manage a homestead alone. No, Ethan agreed, but you could stay here. Maggie's head snapped up, her needle forgotten. Here, Ethan looked uncomfortable but determined. I need help around the ranch. Maria isn't getting any younger, and she could use another pair of hands. You'd have room and board for you and Tessa, plus wages. He rushed on before she could respond. It's just a job offer. You'd have your own space in the house, and if you decided it wasn't working out, I'd make sure you got safely to wherever you wanted to go next. Maggie stared at him, searching for the motivation behind his unexpected proposal. Why would you do this? You barely know me. Ethan met her gaze directly. Because you work hard and don't complain. Because your daughter needs stability, and because... He hesitated. Because this place could use a woman's touch again. It's been just me and Maria for too long." There was something in his voice, a loneliness that echoed her own. In that moment, Maggie realized that beneath his capable exterior, Ethan Anderson was as solitary as she was. "I'll think about it," she promised, though in truth, she already knew her answer. The alternative, arriving in a strange town with no guarantees of work or safety, was far less appealing than remaining at a ranch where she and Tessa had already been treated with kindness. Ethan nodded, rising from his chair. "That's all I ask. Good night, Maggie." "Good night, Ethan." As his footsteps faded into the house, Maggie turned her gaze back to the darkening landscape. For the first time since James's death, she felt a flicker of hope for the future. The next morning, Maggie found Ethan in his study, a small room lined with bookshelves that had surprised her when she first discovered it. He looked up from his ledger as she entered. "I've made my decision," she said without preamble. "I would like to accept your offer to stay, at least for a while, but I have conditions." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression neutral. "I'm listening." "First, I want real wages, not just room and board. I need to save for Tessa's future." She took a deep breath. "Second, I want to be clear that this is a business arrangement. I'm not. That is, I won't." "I understand," Ethan interrupted, saving her from her awkward explanation. "Your reputation will be respected in this house. Maria's presence should satisfy any concerns about propriety." Relieved, Maggie continued, "And lastly, I want to learn about the ranch. Not just the household duties, but the business side as well. If I'm to make my own way eventually, I need to understand how things work out here." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Those are reasonable terms. I agree to all of them." He extended his hand across the desk. "Do we have a deal, Miss Parker?" Maggie took his hand, noting the strength and calluses that spoke of years of hard work. "We do, Mr. Anderson." And so Maggie and Tessa became permanent residents of the Anderson Ranch. The first weeks passed in a blur of adjustment as Maggie established new routines and learned the rhythm of ranch life. Maria taught her the intricacies of running the household, while Thomas patiently explained the seasonal patterns of cattle ranching. Ethan himself remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite, even kind when the situation called for it, but he maintained a certain distance. He spent long days working with the hands, often returning after Maggie had already retired for the night. Yet there were moments, a shared smile over Tessa's antics, a brief conversation while watching the sunset, the occasional book recommendation from his extensive library that hinted at the man beneath the reserved exterior. Summer turned to autumn, and as the desert air cooled, Maggie found herself settling into her new life with unexpected contentment. Tessa was thriving, now crawling enthusiastically and attempting her first words. Maria doted on the child as if she were her own granddaughter, and even the ranch hands had taken to bringing her small treasures, a pretty stone, a carved wooden horse. It was early October when the first real crisis arose. A sudden illness swept through the ranch, striking down first Daniel, then Luke, and finally Thomas with high fevers and racking coughs. Maria worked tirelessly to tend to the sick men, but when she too succumbed to the mysterious ailment, the burden of care fell to Maggie and Ethan. "It's not influenza," Maggie declared after examining Thomas. "The symptoms are different. My guess is some kind of lung fever." Ethan looked exhausted, having spent the night moving between the bunkhouse and the main house, checking on the patients. "Whatever it is, we need a doctor." "The nearest one is in Truth or Consequences." "Can you make the ride?" Maggie asked, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "I have to," Ethan replied grimly. "But I'll be gone at least a day, possibly two if the weather turns. Can you manage alone? Maggie straightened her shoulders. I nursed James through weeks of fever. I can handle this. Go. Ethan departed at dawn, leaving Maggie with 4 patients and Tessa to care for. She established a system, setting up a sick room in the main house for Maria and Thomas while visiting the bunkhouse hourly to check on the younger men. When not tending to the ill, she managed to keep the basic ranch operations going, feeding the animals closest to the house, maintaining the fire, preparing simple meals that could be easily consumed by those with little appetite. By nightfall, she was exhausted but determined. She had just settled Tessa down for the night when she heard Thomas calling weakly from the sick room. Rushing to his side, she found him struggling to breathe, his face alarmingly pale. "Ethan," he gasped. "The cattle, south pasture, need water." "Don't worry about the cattle," Maggie soothed, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "Ethan will be back soon with the doctor." Thomas shook his head weakly. "No, understand. 3 days without water, they'll die. All of them." The gravity of the situation dawned on Maggie. The south pasture was the furthest from the house, and if the water pump there had failed, the entire herd could be in danger. Such a loss would be devastating to the ranch. "What needs to be done?" she asked, her voice steady despite her rising panic. Between labored breaths, Thomas explained that someone needed to ride out and manually operate the pump to fill the watering troughs. It was normally a simple task, but with the entire crew incapacitated, there was no one to do it. No one except Maggie. After ensuring that her patients were stable and Tessa was deeply asleep in her cradle, Maggie changed into her sturdiest clothes and boots. She had learned to ride during her months at the ranch, though she was far from expert. Still, she knew the basic route to the south pasture and understood the mechanics of the water pump from Ethan's explanations during their evening talks. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the trail as Maggie rode out on the gentlest of Ethan's horses, a map clutched in her hand. The night air was cool against her face, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Despite her fear, there was something exhilarating about riding alone under the vast canopy of stars, taking charge of a situation that would have paralyzed her with fear just months ago. She reached the south pasture after an hour's ride, relieved to find the cattle still alive, though clearly distressed. The water pump was indeed broken, a simple mechanical failure that required manual operation to bypass. Maggie dismounted and set to work, her arms burning with the effort of pumping water into the troughs. It took nearly 3 hours to fill all the troughs sufficiently, and by the time she finished, Maggie was drenched in sweat despite the cool night. The return journey seemed twice as long, her body aching with fatigue. Dawn was breaking as she approached the ranch, and with it came the sight of a rider approaching from the opposite direction. Even at a distance, she recognized Ethan's distinctive posture on horseback. Another rider followed close behind, presumably the doctor. Ethan spotted her and changed course, galloping toward her with an expression of mingled relief and fury. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded as soon as he was within earshot. "I've been out of my mind with worry." Maggie drew herself up straight in the saddle, too tired for his anger. The cattle in the south pasture needed water. The pump failed. Thomas told me they wouldn't survive another day without it. Ethan's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. "You rode out there alone, at night. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" "Of course I do," Maggie retorted, her own temper flaring. "But what was I supposed to do? Let the herd die? That would have ruined you." "The herd can be replaced," Ethan growled, his voice suddenly fierce. "You cannot." The raw emotion in his voice stunned Maggie into silence. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the unspoken weight of his words hanging between them. The moment was broken by the approach of the doctor, an older man with kind eyes and a harried expression. "Is this the ranch?" he called. "I've got medicine that needs administering promptly." Ethan broke his gaze away from Maggie. "Yes, this way, Dr. Jenkins." To Maggie, he added in a lower voice, "We'll discuss this later." The next hours were consumed with caring for the sick. The doctor confirmed Maggie's diagnosis of lung fever and provided medicine that quickly began to improve the patient's conditions. By nightfall, the crisis had passed, with all 4 patients resting more comfortably. Maggie was nearly asleep on her feet when Ethan found her in the kitchen, mechanically washing dishes that could have waited until morning. "You need rest," he said from the doorway, his voice gentler than it had been earlier. "I'm nearly finished," Maggie replied without looking up. Ethan moved closer, taking the dish from her hands and setting it aside. "Maggie, look at me." She turned reluctantly, expecting another lecture about her reckless behavior. Instead, Ethan's expression was one of profound gratitude. "Thomas told me what you did," he said quietly. "You saved my cattle, maybe the entire ranch. It was brave and foolish and—" He paused, searching for the right words. "And I'm sorry I spoke harshly to you. I was scared when I couldn't find you or Tessa in the house." "Tessa never left her cradle," Maggie assured him. "I checked on her and all the patients before I left, and again as soon as I returned." Ethan nodded. "I know that now, but in that moment—" He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation from a man usually so composed. "In that moment, I realized how important you've become to this place, to me." Maggie's heart stuttered in her chest. "Ethan, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that what you did matters and that I'm grateful." He stepped back, restoring the proper distance between them. "Get some rest, Maggie. You've earned it." As he turned to leave, Maggie found her voice. "Ethan." He paused, looking back at her. "I'm not sorry I went, but I am sorry I frightened you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm beginning to think there's very little that truly frightens you, Theodora Parker." With that, he was gone, leaving Maggie to contemplate the subtle shift that had occurred between them. The days that followed brought healing to the ranch. Under the doctor's care, the patients improved rapidly, though it would be weeks before they regained their full strength. Maggie continued to manage the household and assist with the lighter ranch duties, while Ethan worked from dawn until dusk to compensate for his reduced workforce. They rarely had time for private conversation, but Maggie was acutely aware of a new undercurrent in their interactions, a warmth that hadn't been present before, a mutual respect that went beyond employer and employee. It was Maria, recovering by the fire one evening, who brought matters to a head. "You too," she said, gesturing between Maggie and Ethan as they sat reading in companionable silence. "You dance around each other like shy children. It is ridiculous to watch." Ethan looked up sharply. "Maria, no, let me speak," the older woman insisted. "I am old but not blind." "You care for each other. Why pretend otherwise?" Maggie felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Maria, it's not appropriate." "Appropriate," Maria scoffed. "You are a widow, not a schoolgirl. He is an unmarried man of good character." "What is not appropriate is wasting precious time when life is so uncertain. Did we not just learn that lesson?" With that pronouncement, she rose slowly from her chair and made her way upstairs, leaving Maggie and Ethan in stunned silence. After a long moment, Ethan closed his book. "Maria has never been one to mince words." "No," Maggie agreed, staring fixedly at the page before her. "Though in this case she's making assumptions, is she?" Ethan interrupted, his voice quiet but intent. "Making assumptions, I mean." Maggie finally looked up, meeting his gaze across the room. The question in his eyes was unmistakable, as was the vulnerability beneath his usual confidence. "No," she admitted softly. "I suppose she isn't." Ethan set his book aside and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Maggie, I never intended this to happen. When I offered you a position here, it was genuinely just that a job offer to a woman in need." "I know that," Maggie assured him, "and I've tried to be professional, to remember my place." "Your place?" Ethan frowned. "You don't have a place here, not in the way you're suggesting. You've become essential to this ranch, to all of us. To me." Maggie's breath caught. "Ethan, I'm still grieving James. It's only been 6 months since he died." "I know," Ethan said gently. "And I'm not asking you to stop grieving him. I would never ask that." He hesitated, then reached for her hand, his touch light enough that she could pull away if she wished. "But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there could be something here. Between us." Maggie looked down at their joined hands, his large and work roughened, her smaller but equally marked by labor. There was comfort in his touch, a steadiness that reminded her of the first day they'd met, when he'd led her horse across the desert to safety. "I can't make any promises," she whispered. "Not yet." "I'm not asking for promises," Ethan replied. "Just honesty." Maggie nodded slowly. "Then honestly, I care for you more than I should, more than I expected to, and it frightens me." "Why?" "Because I've already lost one man I loved to this harsh country. The thought of opening my heart again, of risking that kind of pain." She shook her head. "I have Tessa to think of. I can't afford to be reckless with her future." Ethan's expression softened. "Maggie, loving someone isn't reckless. It's the bravest thing a person can do." The simple truth of his words struck her deeply. Before she could respond, a cry from upstairs signaled that Tessa had awakened. "I should go to her," Maggie said, gently withdrawing her hand. Ethan nodded, allowing her to retreat. "We have time, Maggie. I'm not going anywhere." As autumn deepened into winter, the routine of ranch life continued, but with subtle changes that reflected the new understanding between Maggie and Ethan. They began taking evening walks together after Tessa was asleep, sometimes talking for hours about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Ethan shared stories of his childhood, his father's descent into drink after his mother's death, his own determination to rebuild the ranch into something his mother would have been proud of. Maggie told him about growing up in Tennessee, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a blacksmith, her courtship with James, and the gradual awakening to the realization that the life she'd planned was gone forever. "You regret coming west?" Ethan asked one evening as they walked under a sky ablaze with stars. Maggie considered the question seriously. "I regret that James didn't live to see this land. He would have loved it." She glanced at Ethan. "But no, I don't regret coming. If we hadn't, I wouldn't have met you." It was the most direct acknowledgement of her feelings she had yet made, and Ethan's response was equally straightforward. He stopped walking, turned to face her, and with deliberate care placed his hands on her shoulders. "May I kiss you, Maggie?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Maggie nodded, her heart racing. Ethan leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and then his lips were on hers, gentle, questioning, a request rather than a demand. It was a brief kiss, sweet and chaste, but when they parted, Maggie knew with certainty that her life had changed irrevocably. The guilt she had expected to feel at this first step away from her grief was absent. Instead, there was a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. "Thank you," Ethan murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "For what?" Maggie asked, slightly breathless. "For trusting me with that," he replied simply. From that night forward, their relationship gradually deepened. Ethan was patient, never pushing for more than Maggie was ready to give. He treated Tessa with growing affection, spending time with the baby each evening, reading to her from his collection of books, delighting in her rapidly expanding vocabulary. As Christmas approached, the ranch was transformed by Maria's insistence on traditional decorations: pine boughs gathered from the distant mountains, red ribbons, candles in every window. For Tessa's sake, Maggie embraced the festivities, wanting her daughter's first Christmas to be memorable even if the child was too young to truly understand. On Christmas Eve, after a festive dinner with the entire ranch staff, Ethan asked Maggie to join him on the porch. The night was crisp and clear, with a crescent moon hanging low in the western sky. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not much, but—" He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Maggie unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "Ethan, it's beautiful," she breathed, opening the locket to find it empty. "I thought you might want to put a small picture of Tessa inside," Ethan explained. "And perhaps someday, a picture of someone else who's important to you." Maggie recognized the unspoken question in his words. She closed the locket and held it out to him, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. "I have something for you as well," she said when he had finished. "But I'm afraid it's not wrapped." From her own pocket, she withdrew a folded piece of paper and handed it to him. Ethan opened it, reading the few lines she had written by lamplight the night before. "Maggie," he whispered, looking up at her with an expression of wonder. "Are you certain?" "I am," she replied steadily. "If you still want to marry me, Ethan Anderson, my answer is yes." Ethan's response was immediate and emphatic. He gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that left no doubt of his joy. When he set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he said hoarsely. "Someone who understands this life, who isn't afraid of its hardships, who makes every day better just by being in it." Maggie reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "You saved us that day in the desert. Not just our lives, but our future. You gave us hope when I thought all was lost." "You saved me too," Ethan replied. "From loneliness, from becoming a man who only lived for his land and his cattle." They were married on New Year's Day, 1886, in a simple ceremony performed by the traveling preacher who visited Truth or Consequences monthly. Maria decorated the ranch house with evergreen boughs and winter berries, and Thomas stood as Ethan's best man. Maggie wore a new dress of deep blue wool, with Tessa in her arms dressed in white. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but the look that passed between them as they spoke the ancient promises was anything but conventional. It held the memory of their first meeting, the gradual building of trust, and the certainty that they had found in each other something rare and precious. That night, after the celebrations had ended and their guests had departed, Ethan carried Maggie across the threshold of the bedroom they would now share. With Tessa sleeping soundly in her cradle in the adjoining nursery, they came together as husband and wife, their passion tempered by tenderness, their joy deepened by the knowledge of how close they had come to never finding each other at all. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Ethan pressed a kiss to Maggie's temple. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day, when I found you by the wagon?" Maggie smiled against his chest. "You said I'd sleep under your roof. And now?" He prompted, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "And now it's our roof," Maggie replied softly. "Our home." The years that followed brought both joy and hardship to the Anderson ranch. The spring after their marriage saw the arrival of a bumper calf crop that significantly increased their herd. That summer, Maggie discovered she was expecting their first child together, news that brought Ethan to his knees beside her chair. his face pressed against her still flat stomach in wordless gratitude. Their son, James Ethan Anderson, was born on a stormy February night in 1887, with Maria serving as midwife and Ethan pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When finally allowed inside, he approached the bed with reverence, taking in the sight of his wife holding their newborn son. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's tiny hand, "just like his mother." "And stubborn like his father," Maggie teased weakly. "He was in no hurry to arrive." Ethan laughed, the sound filled with relief and joy. "That's my boy. Taking his time, making sure he gets it right." Tessa, now nearly 2 years old and talking in full sentences, was fascinated by her baby brother. Under Maggie's watchful eye, she would sit beside the cradle, solemnly reading to the infant from her picture books or singing the songs Maria had taught her. The sight of her children together never failed to move Maggie deeply. Tessa, with her copper hair and her father's gentle spirit, would always be a living connection to James and the life they had planned. But seeing her flourish under Ethan's care, hearing her call him Papa with complete naturalness, confirmed for Maggie that she had made the right choice in accepting his proposal. The Anderson family grew again in 1889 with the birth of their daughter, Sarah Maria, named for Ethan's mother and the woman who had become a grandmother to all 3 children. The ranch prospered, allowing Ethan to expand their holdings and build a larger home to accommodate their growing family. Through it all, Maggie and Ethan maintained the partnership that had begun that fateful day by a broken-down wagon. They faced the challenges of ranch life together: drought years that threatened the herd, a fire that destroyed the original barn, the difficulties of raising children in a remote location with limited access to formal education. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Maggie with a journey back to the spot where they had first met. The landscape had changed little in the intervening decade: the same harsh beauty, the same unforgiving sun. But they were different people now, shaped by their years together, by the family they had created, by the life they had built from the ruins of their separate pasts. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come along that day?" Maggie asked as they stood hand in hand, looking out over the desert. Ethan shook his head. "No, some things are meant to be, Maggie. I believe we would have found each other somehow, even if it hadn't been here." "Such a romantic," Maggie teased, leaning into his side. "Who would have thought that stern cowboy had such notions?" "Only with you," Ethan replied, his arm tightening around her waist. "Always with you." As they turned to ride back to the ranch, back to their children, their home, their life, Maggie reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The path had been harder than she could have imagined when she'd set out from Tennessee, filled with loss and fear and grief. But it had also led her to Ethan, to a love that had healed her broken heart and given her the strength to build a new life from the ashes of her old dreams. In the endless expanse of the Arizona Territory, she had found not just shelter for herself and her child, but a place to belong, a family to cherish, and a love to sustain her through all the seasons of her life. "Race you home," Ethan suggested with a grin that made him look years younger. Maggie laughed, already urging her horse forward. "Try to keep up, Cowboy." Their laughter echoed across the desert as they rode side by side toward the horizon, toward the home they had built together, the home that had begun with a broken wagon, a sleeping baby, and a cowboy's simple offer of shelter that had changed their lives forever.